Dear viewers, welcome back to our exploration of al-Ghazali's teachings, and today we are diving into the third part of his revival series. And this part is especially interesting because it shows how philosophy and Sufism connect. We'll learn about how our minds, bodies and spiritual journeys all are intertwined. The third quarter of the revival, or Ruba' al-Mahlikat, are termed by al-Ghazali himself. It starts with the two books that give us a preview of what is coming in the second half of the work. The first book, Marvels of the Heart, talks about how our mind works with our bodies and desires, and how we learn about the world and about God, and how to balance our minds and bodies to understand God better. The second book, Disciplining the Soul, or Tahzeeb al-Nafs, is about ethics, what it means to be virtuous, connecting it to what we had learned in the first book, and how to change our behavior for the better. These books are interesting because they show us connection between the criterion of action, the mizan al-amal, or the revival of the religious sciences, in terms of how Sufi and philosophical methods are used to reach the afterlife. They show that al-Ghazali believed you could know God through logical, philosophical thinking and mystical Sufi practices. He also thought that while the Sufi way might not always work, it could give a clearer understanding of God. In a part of his work called The Difference Between the Inspiration and its Study, and the difference between the Sufi way of discovering truth and the theoretician way, al-Ghazali talks about how people learn things focusing only on how they do it, not what they learn. The theoretician don't say Sufi insights are impossible, but the way Sufi learn is unlikely to work well. They think it's more likely to mess up your temperament, confuse your mind, and make you sick unless you also train your soul and learn about the truth of different sciences. They're disappointed that many Sufis waste years believing things that they could understand quickly with proper scientific training. And next, he compares the heart to a lake that can be filled with either from outside by rivers or from inside by a spring deep down. The rivers represent learning and senses, while the spring represents inspiration gained through being alone and avoiding distractions, especially sight. The water from inner spring is said to be purer and steadier, but it's not said to be made of something different. Then he brings up the story about Chinese and Byzantine artists. It was an intriguing tale. A king orchestrated a painting competition to adjudicate between the Chinese and Byzantines. And these two groups wait for supremacy in the beauty of their craftsmanship in decorating and painting. To the king's astonishment, the Chinese participants entered the contest without using any colors. However, when the veil was lifted, he discovered that the Chinese had meticulously polished their side, rendering it similar to a polished mirror, or as a al-mir'atul majlua, as al-Ghazali has termed it. This mirror-like surface not only reflected the Byzantine artwork, but was also enhanced with the illumination and dazzling brilliance. The story underscores that true understanding of divine, or the real, lies not in accumulating knowledge, but in cultivating virtuous character through the process of cleaning, purification and polishing. And both these stories suggest that both philosophy and Sufism lead to the same knowledge, although the Sufi way might make things clearer. Another part of the criterion of action, or the mizan al-amal, that appears in the revival of the religious sciences is his description of the Sufi path, which might surprise some readers. It's almost the same as what he wrote in the criterion of action. In the criterion of action, he didn't talk about his own experience with Sufism, but relied on a Sufi authority had told him when he asked about it. This shows that when he wrote the criterion of action, he hadn't practiced Sufism himself. In the revival, he doesn't mention the spiritual guide anymore, but the description of the Sufi path is still the same and in the third person. For example, they say that the path is dedication to spiritual exercise and the elimination of blameworthy traits. This suggests that even when he wrote the revival, he still didn't have first-hand experience with Sufism. And this section, called the Marvels of the Heart, might have been one of the first parts he wrote. It is possible he wrote it while he was in Baghdad before he started practicing Sufism in Damascus, or shortly after he moved there. The second theoretical book, Disciplining the Soul, talks about ethical theories inspired by Plato and Aristotle. It is based on Plato's idea of the soul being made up of three parts and Aristotle's concept of virtue and finding a balance between extremes. Al-Ghazali also suggests that while you can try to be morally perfect on your own, it is better to have a guide. The next book focuses on breaking the two desires. It discusses on how natural desires for food and sex are important for survival but can distract us from spiritual growth. In the previous sections, these desires were seen as just part of life, but now the focus is on weakening these influences. The goal is not just to get rid of these desires entirely, but to manage them better. It is about finding a middle ground between indulging too much and trying to get rid of them completely. Al-Ghazali suggests eating in moderation and recommends marriage as a lawful way to satisfy sexual desires. In the second book of this quarter, the Aristotelian ethical model is discussed but played a smaller role in dealing with individual vices than expected. The recommended approach to dealing with these vices often leans more towards deficiency than excess, which reflects al-Ghazali's ascetic and otherworldly ideals rather than Aristotelian idea of great soul. The quarter ends with a broader discussion and voice in the book on the condemnation of delusion. Al-Ghazali defines delusion as different from ignorance because the deluded believe something false due to their passions. And interestingly, he first mentions someone who believes the physical world is real while the afterlife is uncertain, which mirrors his arguments against philosophers who deny an afterlife in the criterion of action. The book continues in this vein, arguing against specific delusions that hinder the path to happiness. Al-Ghazali addresses four groups, in particular scholars, devout worshippers, Sufis, and the wealthy. Among scholars, Al-Ghazali criticizes those who focus on obscure legal matters but ignore studying the afterlife, which is a common criticism in the revival of the religious sciences. He repeats many of his criticism of legal experts and theologians, also noting that religious studies are more likely to distract from spiritual growth compared to secular sciences that are clearly not spiritual goals. He also criticizes those who study mystical knowledge but neglect ethical behaviors, as well as those who aim for knowledge and practice but forget to purify their hearts from vices. Pious worshippers are warned against getting too caught up in the details of worship and forgetting about personal moral growth. They might focus on extra acts of worship while neglecting their deity to improve themselves morally. Al-Ghazali explains that every act of worship has potential delusion, which he has discussed in the previous parts of the book, and here he summarizes those ideas for the readers. The discussion about the delusions of Sufis starts with the criticism of those who are superficial, hypocritical, or practice without understanding. Al-Ghazali also criticizes the ihya who believe they are above religious laws, rituals, or ethical training. And this group became more of a focus for him after he returned to Khorasan, where he wrote against them in the Alchemy of Felicity and in the CIISR and in a separate letter. The most serious criticism of Sufis reveals what Al-Ghazali meant and when he said in other works that a Sufi could become trapped in delusion without the tool of logic. One possible delusion is mistaking an initial mystical experience for a complete understanding of God's essence. But the most serious delusion involves how the heart relates to knowledge. Al-Ghazali often describes the heart as a mirror that, when free from voice, can reflect true realities or intelligible forms. And here al-Ghazali explains that heart has the capacity to hold the true image of all existence. It can understand all knowledge that leads to happiness in the afterlife. But some people confuse the heart, which is where they witness this understanding, with the actual truth itself. And this happens with the well-known Sufi al-Hallaj, who is in a moment of deep understanding mistakenly declared that I am the truth, confusing his own self with the reality he perceived. The remedy for all delusion consists of three things: intellect, aql, gnosis, marifa, in terms of the science of unveiling, and knowledge, ilm, in terms of the science of praxis. And al-Ghazali emphasizes the importance of intelligence for spiritual growth, and he states that intellect is essential for achieving happiness in the afterlife. He recalls his earliest statement in the criterion of action, that only those with enough intelligence should study philosophy. Regarding knowledge in the context of the science of unveiling, al-Ghazali discusses the importance of understanding oneself, one's creator, the world, and the afterlife. He directs reader to the other parts of the revival where unveiling is explored. As for knowledge in the context of the science of praxis, al-Ghazali explains that this is the main or the basic subject of the revival as a whole. It involves practical knowledge and how to apply it in daily life to achieve the spiritual growth. And the section on the condemnation of delusion concludes with a caution against those who, after overcoming their own delusions, start guiding others on the same path. Al-Ghazali warns of the danger involved in gathering followers. It can lead to desires for power and recognition, jealousy towards other guides, and frustration with the mistakes of disciples. And there is a risk of becoming self-satisfied or believing one has received a special favor from God. Al-Ghazali emphasizes that guiding others should be solely for the sake of God, without any sense of superiority. He acknowledges that the dangers of such leadership never disappear. The fact that he includes this advice in a book meant to guide readers suggests that he has considered these risks himself and believes he can overcome them. And this reflects his confidence in own achievements and status, which he expressed in the criterion of action. And now, as we finish this part, we have explored the importance of balancing the philosophical thinking and spiritual practices, and we have also seen the danger of being misled and the responsibilities of guiding others. So, friends, let's be ready for the next and final segment of the revival series, and until next, peace be upon you all. Thanks for watching.